This podcast is sponsored by Systems Accountants, a specialist global resourcing solutions company focused exclusively on accounting technology and finance transformation.
It takes a special kind of person to be a philanthropist. It's choosing a career based on a passion for wanting to make a difference in other people's lives and deserves more respect than it gets because in actual fact, it's more a lifestyle than it is a career. This perhaps perfectly describes Sally Pettipher, who is CEO at the Atlas Foundation. Sally, it's a privilege to speak to you here at the Rugby Business Network. Thank you for taking the time to chat to us.
Thank you. It's lovely to talk.
For those who may not be familiar with the incredible work the Atlas Foundation does on a daily basis, please tell us when the organization was founded and in what ways do you bring support to disadvantaged people around the world through the power of rugby?
Atlas was founded 2 years ago by Jason Leonard, who the rugby people will know well, the most capped English rugby man ever, since overtaken by a female prop, I'm pleased to say. And Jason founded the foundation because he has done a huge amount of charitable work for other charities over the last decade, really, since he retired from international rugby. And he felt that he wanted something where he had more command of where the money was spent. Because he travelled a lot with his international career, he saw the highs and the lows, and some of the countries that you go to, you have enormous wealth and enormous poverty looking at each other across the street. And he knows that, particularly in the front row, there are these massive men with massive hearts, and he wanted to raise money in the developed rugby world and spend it helping underprivileged people, particularly children, in the poorest parts of the world.
Fantastic. Well, Sally, you are a specialist in sports philanthropy as you were the originator of the All Schools Legacy Program for the 2015 Rugby World Cup, and you hold several trusteeships as well as executive and non-executive positions in sports organizations. What is it about this field, particularly in rugby, which interested you in making this a career?
I think it's that rugby has a very special capacity to help people. In the UK and with the All Schools plan, bringing rugby to younger people, particularly that secondary school age, teenage, when they're all going a little bit off the rails and this is who I am. And rugby is a really physical sport, and it's a real team sport, and it's a sport that is embedded in good values. And so regardless of how good or bad you are as a player, those values are a real gift to you for the rest of your life. And with my charity head on, my philanthropy head on, I realised what a powerful vehicle rugby is for helping people.
Brilliant. Well, what I find so unique about Atlas is that it's a non-profit organization which not only is giving back to rugby directly through different projects and initiatives, but the foundation is also actively involved in helping other charities. Which are some of the charities Atlas are involved with, and in what ways do you provide support?
Well, we raise money, and the way that we ensure that we meet the needs of children overseas is by working with really good grassroots rugby charities in country. So we are not experts at that delivery piece, but what we do have are rugby champions, former ex-internationals like Jason, in country, in territory, and they know the very best rugby charities on the ground, many of whom don't have fancy fundraisers, and they bring them to us. So we work with charities like the Tag Rugby Trust in Upesi Pride. We work with SALA, the South African Rugby Legends in South Africa, and they deliver work for us. Sometimes we work directly with clubs. We're talking to a club in Buenos Aires at the moment about a feeding program. So we provide a hot meal, possibly the only hot meal these children have all week, at the end of a rugby session. So they get both nourishment and play at the same time. So there's many direct clubs, rugby unions and grassroots charities that we will fund.
Well, Sally, for you personally, is there a specific project close to your heart or a particular story you can share of a moment when Atlas made a real difference in a disadvantaged community?
Well, Jason and I were in Kenya recently at the King's Rugby Academy, and it was just charming to see this massive prop handing a spoon to a little tiny child in a pair of rugby boots to eat a meal. And that child was wearing a West Ham top. And Jason, who's a great hammer at heart, said, I found a hammer in the heart of Africa. So that was very lovely.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure that Atlas would not be able to do any of these amazing projects and contribute to rugby in the way it does if it was not for the support it receives from sponsors. How would you go about forming relationships and partnerships with the various businesses and foundations that are associated with Atlas?
The lovely thing about Atlas is it's new, personal. We know all of our supporters. We know them personally. So we don't have millions and millions of donors. We have a handful of individuals and companies that we have a really personal relationship with. And so we talk to them about what is meaningful for them. We have a guy who has a property somewhere in Africa. He wants to help the people around him. And so Atlas works with him to find a really good project, and then we can support that for him.
Okay.
So at the moment, it's the joy of being small and personal. And the relationships are there between our rugby champions and our donors. So we get a little bit of extra stardust for our companies and our people because they get to visit projects or come on events with their rugby heroes.
Well, Sally, as you are aware, the Rugby Business Network and the Atlas Foundation have also formed a partnership. Tell our listeners how this came about and why does the relationship work?
Oh gosh, well, the Rugby Business Network has been wonderful for us in rather unforeseen ways, and I will give you an example. So Jason seems to know everybody, of course, and knew the Rugby Business Network. And one of the things that the network did was to host an evening in Paris. Jason and I were over supporting Philippe Sella. He has a charity called Les Enfants de l'Oval, and we fund that charity. It does education work in Africa. So there we were in Paris. The Rugby Business Network in Paris arranged an evening reception for us. And at that reception, we met a wonderful set of French people, including former international players. And they are now establishing a branch of Atlas in France to specifically do what we do, which is raise money from the rugby community to fund projects for children, particularly in French-speaking Africa. And all of that with some legends of the game in France, all came because of the Rugby Business Network.
Well, Sally, you often find that professional rugby players will want to pursue a career in business upon their retirement. Why would you encourage them to rather take up charity work with organizations as a career instead?
Well, I am a strong believer that charity work is professional work. It may be that the profits that a charity make are invested in charitable projects, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a really solid profession. It's a profession that requires people with marketing skills, with logistical skills. Depending on whether you're on the delivery end or on the fundraising end, you need strategic planning skills, and many people in the charity world get paid a proper wage, but probably not a lavish wage. But you get paid in ways beyond that. So you make a living, but you also do something just wonderful that you climb out of bed for with a song in your heart.
Well, you have already mentioned a few times now your founding chairman of Atlas, Jason Leonard. What is it like to work with Jason, and in what ways is he actively involved in the foundation?
Well, Jason founded it and he's chairman, and he's a very executive chairman. What's he like to work with? Well, he's wonderful and mad, and it gets very messy sometimes, but he is incredibly bright, incredibly hardworking. You can see every reason why he was an international sportsman. There is nothing actually that doesn't pass through him, and that he will make really swift, strategic, intelligent decisions about. So he's a wonderful chairman. The other thing about him is he's incredibly humble. There's this foundation was not called the Jason Leonard Foundation. It was very clearly called Atlas because it is there for all rugby people, particularly front rows, who want to, bear the weight of other people's problems and help out. And so while he's my chairman and we have a, very close direct line, we also have 3 other props on the board. Jeff Probyn, Paul Rendell, who's best known as the judge, and Lord Addington, who is the captain of the Commons and Lords parliamentary rugby team. And then around the world, we have these rugby champions in different countries helping to find projects, police projects, make sure that the money goes to the right place. So this charity will live, thrive and survive with a rolling mall of rugby people leading it. It's not just about one man.
Absolutely. Well, as you have mentioned, Atlas is still in the early stages of its development. How has the past year been for the organisation, and what do you foresee in the months and years which lie ahead?
Well, we raised £200,000 and spent 75% of that on projects last year. We're going to increase by 50% this year. We'll turn over £300,000 and spend £200,000 on charity work. And we now have a fledgling Atlas team in the USA. We are just setting up a new legal structure in France. And we have a big launch of something very front row focused later this year. So our growth curve is really quite rapid for the first 5 years. And then I expect that we'll settle around a £1 to £2 million charity and just look at being a really efficient force for good across the world.
Finally, Sally, Atlas have been known to hold a number of fantastic events and functions in the past. Can you mention some of the up-and-coming ones, and in which ways can businesses not already associated with Atlas get involved?
Well, we tend to do a small number of very high-quality events. We have an annual dinner once a year. So Wednesday, the 13th of September, we have a Lions-focused event at the Park Lane Hilton, and businesses can take a table, bring clients for hospitality. You might want to make sure that they're that they're willing to party.
Great.
This is not a quiet event, and it will be full of current and past Lions. Some real headliners, and thereafter. We have a big charity trek in Africa next year.
Oh, wow.
So we're doing 4x4 rallying. It's not a race, but as Jason said, I'm not coming last. So that's 4 days around Zimbabwe and Botswana with some really spectacular scenery, but also dropping off boots and balls at some of the rugby projects that we support. Now that's a very individual thing. It's only a handful of people. They need to pledge £10,000 from their company or from sponsors, and we only have 4 places left.
Oh, wow.
But you will be going with Jason Leonard, Bob Skinstadt, and Shane Byrne, so I suspect it's going to be very messy.
Absolutely brilliant. Sally, the Atlas Foundation is without a doubt using the power of rugby to better the lives of people in need, and we at the Rugby Business Network applaud you for all that you have already done and will continue to do in the future.
Wonderful. We're so delighted to work with you. You're a great bunch of people. Thank you so much.